The giant horse dragged a heavy wagon alone. What the farmer found inside made him cry. The morning wind dragged across the frost-crusted fields like a slow whisper. It was the kind of cold that bit gently at the skin, not cruel, just honest, the kind that said winter had truly arrived. A single crow flapped across the grey sky above the bare orchard, its call echoing once before it vanished into silence. Thomas Brindle stood at the edge of his porch, boots heavy with dried mud, calloused hands curled around a chipped tin mug. Steam lifted from the coffee, disappearing into the stillness like everything else had this year. His farm, tucked into the valley beside the old willow grove, had once been filled with the laughter of children and the clatter of chores. Now it was quiet. No barking dog, no smell of bread. Just the barn, the soil, the ghosts of a life that had slipped quietly into the cracks of time. He hadn't spoken to a soul in 3 days, and he hadn't wanted to. Then he heard it. Not loud, more like the groan of something heavy trying to move forward. He squinted past the fields, toward the dirt road where wagon ruts still carved deep into the frozen earth. At first, there was nothing but the brush and a line of skeletal trees. Then it appeared, slowly, like something from a dream. A massive horse, black as coal, its coat wet with sweat and flanks heaving, staggered into view. It pulled a wooden wagon behind it, creaking under its own weight, the wheels cutting awkward tracks into the frozen road. No reins, no rider, just the beast, moving forward like it had no other choice. Thomas set his mug down slowly and stepped off the porch. The horse stopped when it reached the yard, as if it knew. It didn't flinch. It didn't flee. Its eyes were wide but quiet, like it had seen too much and had nothing left to fear. Thomas approached slowly, his boots crunching, over the thin frost. The animal was trembling, foam caked along its mouth, but it didn't pull back. It simply looked at him, like it had something to say. He moved to the side of the wagon, where a heavy tarp had been thrown over the back like a crude blanket. Wind flapped at the edges. Thomas reached out, fingers rough and unsure, and slowly peeled it back. Inside, nestled between hay and a pile of burlap sacks, was a child, a little girl, barely 5. Face pale, lips chapped, eyes wide open. But not dead. Alive. Barely. Frozen. Silent. And staring right at him. Thomas staggered back, heart pounding, a curse caught in his throat. The girl didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes were full of something that split him down the middle. Not fear, not even pain. Just emptiness. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Thomas felt something break open in his chest. She didn't speak. Even as Thomas lifted her from the wagon, her arms hung limp, her head lolled against his shoulder like a sack of wheat. Her skin was cold, not freezing but close. Beneath the layers of old cloth wrapped around her like poor insulation, she weighed barely anything. Just bones and silence. He carried her into the house. The floor creaked under his boots as he moved past the empty kitchen table, past the coat rack no one used anymore, toward the sitting room where the fireplace still remembered how to breathe. He laid her gently on the old leather settee, wrapped a wool blanket around her, and fed kindling to the stove with shaky hands. His breath came quick. He told himself it was the cold, but it wasn't. He stood over her for a long time, unsure. She lay still, eyes open, watching the ceiling like it held a sky only she could see. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. No tears, no sound. Only the hollow presence of someone who had drifted too far from the world. Thomas poured a mug of wadu, arm milk, and held it near her lips. She turned her head away. He sat down in the wooden rocker across from her and just looked. His chest rose and fell, slow and heavy. Something about her eyes, not just the stillness, but the knowing. He'd seen that look before. Not on her. On a boy. A boy of 10 hiding behind a barn door, watching his mother being thrown to the floor by a man who smelled like smoke and rage. A boy too scared to scream. A boy who learned that silence was safer than sound, that running was better than standing. That boy had run for years. Even now, at 62, Thomas didn't know if he ever stopped running. He had buried that part of himself under land, under chores, under silence. Until this girl arrived. Until her eyes unlocked something old. He rose again, unsure why his hands were trembling. He looked out the window. The horse was still standing there, swaying, like it had no reason to move without her. What kind of person leaves a child like that? Who straps a girl to a wagon and lets a half-dead horse drag her across winter roads? He swallowed hard. The fire popped in the hearth. The room smelled of ash and wool and something else. Fear. He should call someone. The sheriff or the orphanage. But his hand didn't move toward the phone. What if they didn't come? Or worse, what if they did? What if they took her back to where she came from? He looked at her again. Her fingers were curled into fists beneath the blanket, like even in sleep she braced for pain. And in that moment, Thomas made a choice. He didn't say it aloud. No declarations, no grand vow. He just walked to the hallway closet, took out an old quilt, the one his wife had made the year before she passed, and tucked it around the girl like it was armor. Then he sat beside her and stayed there through the night. He would not let her be alone again. Not if he could help it. By morning, the girl still hadn't spoken. But she had shifted. Her head rested against the quilt now. Her fists had unclenched. She slept, but it was the uneasy sleep of someone half in another world. Ears tuned for danger, muscles curled tight. Thomas moved around her like one does near a wounded animal, slow, quiet, always watching. The horse was gone. Sometime before dawn, it had vanished from the yard. No hoofprints past the tree line, no sound, just gone, like it had delivered her and disappeared into legend. But this wasn't a fairy tale. Thomas knew that much. He didn't ask questions right away. He fed her warm broth, changed out the wet cloth on her forehead, and left the radio off. She wouldn't meet his eyes, but she stayed. That was something. 3 days passed before anyone came looking. It started with tire tracks, deep and unfamiliar. Then came the men. 2 of them drove up in a truck that looked too clean for this part of the world, suits under dusters. One stepped out, tall, polished, like someone who had never worked a field in his life. The other stayed leaning against the truck, chewing a toothpick, scanning the land like he owned it. "You Brindle?" the tall one asked, flashing a badge too quick to read. Thomas nodded, slow. His gut had already turned cold. "We're looking for a missing child," the man said. 5 years old, brown hair, answers to Sparrow. Seen anything strange lately? Thomas didn't blink. Strange like what? The man tilted his head, as if amused. Like a wagon coming through without a driver. Thomas wiped his hands on his trousers. "Can't say I have." The man smiled thinly, like he expected that. "She's not safe, Mr. Brindle. Has medical issues. Needs to be under proper care. Her father's worried sick." That was the first lie. Thomas knew a liar's eyes. He'd seen them in mirrors before. The girl, Sparrow, had begun speaking the night before. Just 2 words, whispered in the dark. "Don't trust." She didn't say who, but now Thomas knew. "She got loose from a treatment facility," the man added. "State's involved. We'll be back. With papers." They left a business card. Thomas didn't pick it up. That night he sat by the fire while Sparrow colored with a broken crayon on old newspaper. She'd drawn a big black horse, and a pute, truck with 2 men, and something else, a stick figure with long arms and no face. She called him the Rag Man, she whispered. Thomas looked at the drawing and felt something settle in his bones. The Rag Man wasn't a father. He was something worse. Maybe not just one man, maybe a system, A trade, a buyer, a liar in a suit with papers and a badge no one checked. He knew now. Sparrow hadn't escaped. She'd been sent, and whoever had sent her had plans to get her back. Thomas rose and locked the door. Then every window. He pulled his old hunting rifle from behind the cabinet and dusted off the barrel. Whatever was coming, he wasn't going to run this time. The snow came late that week, soft and slow, like a blanket being pulled gently across the land. It hushed the trees and muted the sky. Inside the old farmhouse, warmth flickered from the fire and soup simmered low on the stove. The world felt paused, suspended between what had been and what might come. Sparrow didn't talk much, but she stayed close. She followed Thomas from room to room, not like a shadow, but like someone relearning gravity, careful, tentative. She touched things with small fingers, the cracked radio, the copper kettle, the photograph of a woman with dark hair holding two laughing boys. She never asked who they were. She only looked. On the fourth morning, Thomas brought out an old tin box from under the floorboards. Inside were shells, a ragged cleaning cloth, and a pistol with a handle worn smooth by time. He looked at her. Ever used one? She shook her head. He handed her a wooden spoon instead, then crouched beside her. Same grip. Her fingers closed awkwardly around the spoon. He adjusted her stance. She kept glancing at him, unsure. Steady, he murmured, like you're holding a secret. She smiled. Just for a second. That afternoon she helped him peel potatoes. They didn't talk, just work. Yet when her hands trembled, he didn't mention it. When she burned her finger on the pot, he handed her a cup of cold water and let her sit on the back steps to watch the snow fall. It was there, beneath the low grey sky, that she finally spoke again. "My mom used to sing," she whispered, "when she was scared." Thomas nodded. "Mine used to sew." He waited. "She stopped singing," Sparrow said. Then she stopped waking up. Thomas didn't ask how or why. Instead, he pulled back his sleeve and showed her the faint scars across his forearm, small, white ridges like roads to nowhere. "Did it to feel something," he said quietly. "When I was young, after my brother drowned." Sparrow looked at his arm, then down at her own. She didn't show him anything, but her eyes said enough. That evening, he found her curled beside the hearth, drawing again. This time, it was a cabin, and a horse, and two figures standing side by side, one tall, one small, both smiling. No ragman, no truck. Just peace. For the first time in years, Thomas cooked a real dinner. Biscuits, stew, fried apples in sugar. He didn't know what made him do it. Maybe guilt. Maybe the need to mark this moment. When he slid the plate in front of her, she looked up like he'd given her a treasure. And then, without warning, she reached across the table and held his hand. Her grip was light, unsure, but it was real. Outside, the wind picked up. Branches tapped against the window like quiet warnings. Inside, the fire crackled. It was the calm before the storm. But for now, they were just two broken people who had found something warm in the ruins. It began with the dogs barking down the ridge. Thomas didn't own any dogs. He was on the porch, sharpening a wood chisel, when the noise cut through the cold like a blade. Sparrow stood just inside the door, clutching her drawing pad, eyes wide. She heard it too, and she didn't ask questions. She ran and hid without a word. Thomas stood slowly, laid the chisel down, walked back into the house and retrieved the rifle. He checked the chamber, full, fingers steady, breath tight in his throat. The truck came over the hill like a threat made flesh, the same one from before, but this time followed by another. 4 men, all armed. 2 wore long coats. 1 had mirrored sunglasses. The last was the tall man from before. He stepped out first. No badge this time. "Let's not play games, Mr. Brindle," he called, voice sharp and clean. "You've got something that belongs to us." Thomas didn't reply. He stood on the porch like an old tree that refused to fall. "She's a ward of the state," the man went on. "Special case, violent tendencies, mental disturbances, dangerous to herself and others. We've got court orders." "Show me," Thomas said. The man smirked. "Why bother? You're not going to live long enough to read 'em." That was when Thomas understood. This wasn't official. These weren't lawmen. They were collectors, traffickers in paper-thin stories and broken children, moving under the radar, protected by silence, money, and fear. Thomas raised the rifle. "You won't take her." The men spread out, calm, trained, like they'd done this before. "You're not young anymore, farmer," the man said, stepping forward. "You sure you want to die for a girl who ain't even yours?" "She is now," Thomas said, steady. The first shot cracked the silence. Thomas didn't know who fired it. Maybe him, maybe them, but the world exploded. The porch splintered, bullets chewed through wood and window. He dropped, rolled, crawled inside. Sparrow screamed once, then went silent, just like he taught her. He fired from the living room window. One man dropped, hit in the leg, screaming into the dirt. Another circled toward the barn. Smoke filled the air. The firewood basket caught a stray shot, scattering ash like snow. Thomas ducked behind the sofa, blood running from his temple. He didn't feel the pain, only the rage. They kicked in the back door. He was out of shells. He too, went to Sparrow, crouched behind the stove, eyes full of terror. He whispered, "When I move, you run. Out the front. Don't stop." She shook her head. "I need you to live," he said. She nodded, barely. He stood. The man in the sunglasses raised his pistol. Thomas stepped into the line of fire, and then a twist no one expected. The black horse charged. Out of nowhere, like thunder, it rammed into the side of the second truck, sending it spinning. One of the men screamed. The horse reared, wild and unchained, as if it had waited for this moment, as if it remembered. Chaos. Sparrow ran. Thomas tackled the gunman, knocking the pistol loose. They wrestled in the dirt, old strength against greed. Another shot rang out. Then silence. Snow fell again. Slow, quiet. Thomas lay on the ground, blood soaking his shirt. The last man fled. Tires screamed, engines vanished. And Sparrow crawled to Thomas, crying his name for the first time. He smiled. She had found her voice. The smoke had cleared. The wind had slowed. The black horse stood motionless at the edge of the field, its flanks heaving, nostrils wide. Steam rose from its body in slow ribbons, fading into the pale morning light. It didn't move, just stood there, like a monument to some ancient vow. Sparrow knelt beside Thomas in the snow. Her hands pressed against the wound in his side, but there was too much red, too fast. His breathing was shallow. His eyes flickered. He didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply laid her head against his chest and listened to what was left of his heartbeat. Minutes passed, or hours. Time folded inward. Then, slowly, Thomas opened his eyes. He reached up, fingers trembling, and touched her hair. A faint smile pulled at his mouth. Not from joy, but from peace. He was still alive. She wrapped both arms around him as if willing her warmth into him and held on as the wind rose again. They didn't speak. There were no words for moments like this. Just breath, just closeness, just survival. By evening, help had come. A passing trucker, flagged down by the black horse still pacing the road, like a guardian, called the local clinic. An old nurse named Maureen arrived in a snow-covered jeep, cursing under her breath but moving fast. She cleaned the wound, stitched what she could, and hauled Thomas onto a wooden sled they'd rigged behind her jeep. Sparrow rode beside him, holding his hand the whole way. The farmhouse faded into the dark behind them, broken windows, torn door, blood in the snow. But it wasn't just a place anymore. It had become a battlefield, a place where someone chose to protect instead of forget. At the clinic, Thomas drifted in and out of sleep. Sparrow never left his side. Not once, not even to eat. The sheriff stopped by the next morning. He'd heard rumors, saw the wrecked truck, asked a few questions, got very few answers. But when he looked at the girl, thin, bruised, with eyes that didn't match her age, he didn't press further. No one came looking again. Not after word got around that a man had almost died protecting her. Not after the truck from the ridge was found torched in the woods, its plates removed, its owners vanished. The ragmen didn't return. They had been seen, and that, in their world, was enough to disappear. On the third night, Thomas sat up for the first time. Sparrow was asleep, her hand still clutching his arm. He watched her face, the way her brow relaxed now in sleep, no longer twisted in fear. He didn't speak. He just watched, and let the silence speak for him. That was the moment he understood something. This wasn't rescue. It wasn't charity. It was redemption. Two lost things, finding each other at the edge of winter. Spring came late that year. The frost lingered into April, and the orchard trees took their time to bloom. But when the first blossoms opened, pale pink and trembling in the breeze, it felt like something deeper had shifted. Thomas walked slower now. A cane in one hand, a worn leather coat, draped across his shoulders, and Sparrow, always a few paces ahead, skipping between the puddles like someone learning to be a child again. She still didn't speak much, but she didn't have to. She whistled while sweeping the porch. She hummed softly when feeding the chickens. And sometimes, at dusk, when the wind quieted and the sky turned to honey, she would sit beside Thomas on the steps and lean against his arm. That was enough. He rebuilt what he could. The broken door, the shattered window, the scorched floorboards, not to restore the past, but to honor the survival. Every hammer strike was a small defiance against the world that had tried to break them. The black horse stayed too. It never wandered far, always grazing near the tree line, always watching, like it had chosen them. One afternoon, Sparrow planted a single white flower by the barn, where the first gunman had fallen. She didn't say why. She just pressed the soil gently and walked away. A quiet act, a memory marked. Thomas kept a journal now, short entries in crooked handwriting. Not about the past, about her. What she drew, what she said, how she held his hand when storms passed overhead. He didn't know who he was writing for, maybe for himself, maybe for her future, maybe just to prove they had lived. On the last page, he wrote, "She doesn't flinch anymore when I say her name, and I don't flinch when I look in the mirror." Months passed. The world moved on. But in the valley, beneath the willows and between two lives once lost, a new one took root. Not loud, not perfect, but real. And one evening, as the sun slid behind the hills and the sky turned the color of forgiveness, Sparrow whispered something in his ear. Just one word. Home. Thomas didn't answer. He only smiled, and watched the horizon like it owed him nothing more. And the wind, soft as memory, carried the word across the land like the last breath of a story that finally knew how to end.